Okay, so we'll just do a brief introduction to what the project is, who's involved, and then we'll get straight on to the desk research that we've started and the user research that we've started. So essentially, net zero is an ambition that we know that the government has set, the world has set, I suppose, a massive problem with many, many people trying to help to solve it. And we think that by joining forces and trying to understand the problem collectively and identify where various people in the landscape are best placed to help at different sections, if we can divide and conquer, we'll solve the problem more effectively. So the Net Zero SME Discovery has been convened by the Broadway Initiative initially, and already there's these many representative bodies, industry bodies, and people that are working in the space to try to create tools and services to help businesses to transition. And I should just add at this point that it's very much an open collaboration. For this reason, we're working in the open. So if there are other people on call that are working in a similar styled body or campaign or the like, and you'd like your logo represented, and you want to kind of own this project with us, then it's very much an open invitation. So our approach at this phase, this is a very quick and dirty discovery. We want to be led by user needs. So again, problem is massive. SMEs are a very diverse group, basically the majority of the economy. And so if we're going to serve them, we need to understand how they think, what problems they're finding, what they need. We want to work in an agile way. So we don't want to assume that we know how things are going to pan out. For that reason, we're working in these 2-week sprints. And we're showcasing what we've concluded at the end of each. And for that reason, this is a very important platform for us too, because we're learning as we go. And I think many people on this call are a lot more knowledgeable on the topic than we are. So we'd like to, guard some time at the end for you to help steer us. It's a tricky platform, but where there's a will, there's a way. And ultimately, we want to identify activities that businesses could carry out, or areas where we could provide support to make the process of transition a lot more intuitive and straightforward for businesses. So just a reminder of what we mean by agile working. We want to do a discovery to articulate our problem and our goal, understand our user needs, and come up with some suggestions for how, based on we understand user needs, we think we might be able to make really impactful interventions. The next phase would be not to build a bunch of services, but to prototype them in an alpha phase, verify that these hypotheses for our interventions are actually valid. The next stage would be to do a beta, which is like a live service, and learn some more. And at that point we go live. So this team that's running this project comes from the world of public service design. And this is kind of the methodology that we're using. Nearly at the end of the intro. So the scope of discovery, as mentioned, is small to medium businesses who aren't yet net zero. So that's, I'm guessing, the vast majority. And that includes those who are kind of unaware what net zero means, and there'll be more about the topic of language in a short while. To those who are doing things with a plan, doing things without a plan. To move your lovely faces to the top of the screen. And ultimately, we want to understand the landscape. We want to understand what is driving organizations to behave the way they're behaving, whether it's policy or economic pressures, etc. I need to click here again. And so for this discovery, our ambition is to identify, prioritize user needs. What will make a need a priority is actually something we're still working through, but it's probably going to be something like where we've identified a kind of need that is going to have a very big climate impact, for example, if we were to meet that need effectively. We want to create a beginning, a first iteration service map of the ecosystem to transition from business as usual to a business that isn't emitting carbon, or that's net zero by 2050. And we want to understand that the touch points with businesses throughout the process. We realize that's going to be very different from business to business and sectors, type of business to type of sector. And for that reason, we'll be prioritizing the, what we think are high value cohorts to focus on. We also at the discovery phase want to understand the cost of maybe not making these interventions, so that there's a bit of an argument for why we might need to invest in a particular intervention, so that we can massively hurry along the process, avoid, I don't know, fines, and hopefully avoid climate catastrophe as well. And we think engagement with SMEs is going to be a massive component of the recommendations that we will make, or the needs that we'll identify the first in this phase as well. So they'll kind of what messages and through what channels SMEs need to hear about what they need to do to reach net zero is going to be part of the recommendations. And this is, I think, my last slide. In a way, this repeats maybe some of the stuff that I've said, but we ultimately want to understand who are the small businesses. What are the personalities behind them, and what will really reach people that run these businesses to make, in some cases, very big investments. We want to understand what's already there, do some kind of gap analysis, and where services and tools maybe aren't reaching the people that could benefit from them, make some engagement recommendations, understand barriers, drivers, opportunities, gaps, that kind of thing. And at this point, can I hand over to, I think, Lauren and Katrina? Yeah.
I'm gonna probably prompt you to move on to next slides. So hi, I'm Katrina, and I'm a content designer in this project, and myself and Lauren Smith will be talking about the desk research we've been doing so far. So I should start this with both kind of caveat and also just a little bit of context about the way we research. So the caveat is basically that we are looking at a range of sources from different angles. So we're sharing very initial findings, but we are aware that some of the materials we're using may have an industry bias, and we'll be looking to qualify that. So really, that's what the other side of this research, which is around the kind of qualitative and quantitative, surveys and interviews, will hopefully be able to, establish more substance to that. And they may sort of challenge, and they may kind of corroborate. Because we work in an agile way, the whole way of doing kind of research blends with the rest of the approach to discovery. So you are basically learning things and then adapting based on what you learn. So that it may be that the stuff that we find out just now, it may slightly change direction, given, based on what we find through data and what we find through interviewing people. So that's just to give that kind of context. So we've used a range of things, existing materials. This is obviously net zero is part of a much bigger narrative about climate change and businesses that stretches back at least 30 years. I'll talk about that more when we come onto the language. And also we've got new research. So this is, again, I'm going to talk about this more. This is an evolving narrative. This is literally changing on a weekly basis now as more, sort of policy documents come out, as new technologies are kind of surfacing, as the conversation gets a lot more high profile, which we've already obviously all seen even in, the past couple of weeks since the announcement of the 10-point plan by government. As part of that desk research, we've been looking at, survey findings and reports and briefings and data set. We've been tracking data using online tools. We've been looking at the conversation across channels, for instance, forums. And we've also been using looking at the role of the SMEs in the UK economy, and literally what their kind of views are on regulations and energy efficiency. So I think you can move on to the next slide. So yeah, this is there is a kind of a bigger picture in terms of the economic context. So we know, as Linda said, the vast majority of the UK's businesses are SMEs, and they kind of range across quite a really kind of big area. We are talking for many of them about very small or micro businesses. So they may have 0 employees, it may go up to 49 employees. So that can be, literally the accountants working from home in their house, or, it can be the corner shop, it can be, a small manufacturing firm. It's a really broad range. I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Lauren, and she's going to give you more about the economic context and yeah. Oh, actually.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Linda, if you stay on the previous one.
Sorry.
Great. Thanks for doing the controlling as well, Linda. It's really really helpful. So yeah, thanks very much for that intro, Katrina. And yeah, so as Katrina notes, we sort of spent a bit of time just to delve into, unpack a little bit more sort of the role that UK SMEs are playing in the UK economy. So just wanted to pull out some points there. So, I mean, I guess firstly, just to note, in sizing the UK SME population, estimates can vary across data sets, depending on, type of data collected. Helpfully there's government guidance, which gives pointers as to which data sets are useful depending on questions being asked. So the figures sort of, noted are from sort of October 2020 release of the BEIS Business Population Estimates publication, which gives the most comprehensive estimate of SME numbers in the UK. So in UK context, SMEs are, comprising the vast majority of UK's 6 million businesses. They're highly diverse, vital to the UK economy, and contributing around 2.3 trillion in turnover. By aggregate, they are also the largest UK employer at 61% of total employment. SMEs at around 16.8 million. Broken down further, so this sort of unpacks into small and micro businesses. So those with 0 to 49 employees, they make up 99.3% of the total business population. So of the 5.94 million businesses. So at the start of 2020, nearly a fifth, so 17% of all SMEs were in operating construction, particularly as suppliers to large firms. Around 15% of SMEs operated in the professional, scientific and technical activities area, and 9% were in the wholesale and retail trade repair sector. As of October 2020, since 2000, we can see that the number of SMEs has increased by 2.5 million, so by around 73%. Some caution needs to be sort of given to that figure, just as we see what the impacts of COVID are and other pressure points as they play out into these figures. We know that private sector businesses are not evenly distributed across the UK. London and the southeast of England having a large share, out of any other UK country or region. So we're delving further into how different types of SMEs break up across other sectors and areas. As a quick indication, however, on overall business numbers, at the start of 2020, we can see that England had 5.3 million private sector businesses, Scotland had 370,000, Wales 209,000, and around 148 in Northern Ireland. And then London, southeast of England account for 35% of UK business population. So that just gives you a bit of a flavour of sort of, how that breaks up across area and sector. So if we go, so on the slide here, so what we've found, prior studies have noted the specific challenges in engaging SMEs in research and surveys, and SMEs are widely acknowledged as a difficult target, for energy policy. This is in part due to their diversity. They operate in every sector and all property types, and vary from one person operations with no business premises to manufacturers up to 259 employees. So in brief, our findings indicate that a bespoke approach looks essential, given that, that they are so diverse in terms of size, function, business model and assets. And then, it's just some of the examples that we've pulled out there. So, ranging from hairdressers to multinationals, they may rent or own their own premises and equipment. They have varied access to time, resource and expertise. So the key takeaway from this is really, as findings on SME diversity are pretty clear, the takeaway is that we're not treating SMEs in this discovery as a homogenous group. We'll use the survey and interviews to find out more on this, and we'd like to understand further what different tailored approaches could look like based on user needs. But yes, so I'll hand over to Katrina now for some reflections on language and meanings, just conscious of time.
Hi there. So yeah, I'm also aware. Thank you for everyone that's commenting in the chat so far. We will try and allow time for questions at the end. And yes, we are going to be doing more. There's potential to do obviously more deep dives. The sector specific area is these are still early findings, so we will probably, based on what we find, look at how we can explore those more. So in terms of like the findings around initially, it's, as I said before, it's an evolving narrative. It's the conversation just this year has changed so rapidly and so dramatically, from energy efficiency to net zero, and that is part of a broader conversation. You can't separate it out from the historical narrative, which is what people are used to. So you may have, when we're talking about small and medium enterprises, we may be talking anywhere from the individual who's also a consumer up to, quite a big business, and they may be more used to the language of energy efficiency. One of the things, the big thing that comes out is understanding actually what it means to become net zero and what is involved is complicated, and awareness varies, because this isn't a homogenous group, and it may depend on their context, at the time that they learn about it, what it means for them, and because the language of, specifically of net zero targets sits within a broader climate change narrative. If you move on to the next slide, Linda. So we've been using data-driven sort of tools. So we're using online tools. That means things like Answer the Public, Google Trends, Keyword.io is very kind of top-level ways to see what words people are using. Because if we're seeing what words people are using, we're getting a real-time sense of what are the things that are important to them. And that, again, allows us to kind of capture that and then build on that in an agile approach, with what we learned through the user research. Also can inform the way we approach, what we want to get out of interviews with people. And we're needing to track that in real time, because the conversation is shifting literally week by week as new news items come out, as new policies come out. The conversation is changing, and keeping up with it in order to be able to provide substantive results that can really make an impact quite quickly is really essential. So the findings generally are suggesting and highlighting various issues and topics and questions. So things like Answer the Public and Google Trends are highlighting very hot topics such as investment strategy, infrastructure and policy. So we've had, the National Infrastructure Strategy just published at the end of November. Suddenly that's on people's radar. We have Answer the Public surfacing questions, including how to be a net zero business and how to calculate your carbon footprint. Like, how to calculate your carbon footprint isn't necessarily related to net zero targets, but in terms of people's understanding, that's something we have to explore, because it then enables us to get across a common understanding of what it means to become net zero. So exploring how the way language is used is really, really important. So net zero becomes part of a family of phrases. That's what Answer the Public, Google Trends and Keyword.io are all suggesting. And this can potentially raise confusion, so that's an initial finding, but may also be an opportunity to raise awareness. So for example, using the language of carbon neutral and carbon footprint and emissions alongside net zero, and really being able to define what each of those mean and how they relate, enhances understanding, and that enables people to do the right thing. So we have
I'll hand over to Andy in about 1 minute, just so you know.
Okay, so this is so barriers we have, again, this kind of element of language, but generally kind of capacity and capability, and not just being hampered by things like cost or potentially debt, business debt, but actual emotional needs. So they may need to understand what going net zero means for them, including how to measure and competing priorities. So for instance, just now, surviving COVID-19, and trust that the recommended actions are right for their business, trust that actually net zero has a meaning for them. If we move on to the next slide, and Lauren's going to talk about that.
Sorry, just to get a quick check on timing, Linda, just so I know sort of how I need to break this up. There's a lot I could say here.
Yeah,
but
1 minute, because we got to get onto user research, sorry.
Yeah, no, totally fine. So basically, yeah, no, that's fine. So, the sort of the three sort of headline points, I guess, to make are the ones that are just on the slide. You know, there has been a number of pressure points on UK SMEs this year. You know, sort of that's playing out in terms of what we're seeing around, I guess you could say, small business confidence. There's a few sort of ways you can look at, you know, getting measures for, you know, for business, health of business, I guess you could say, you know, one being the Purchase Manager Index, another being FSB Small Business Index. So just on that, we can see that there's been a huge drop in confidence amongst small businesses in the latest SBI for Q3. Of note, over half of small firms reported falling revenue levels during Q3, with half also expecting falling revenue over the following quarter. You know, domestic economy, consumer demand remain the most commonly cited barriers to growth, with concerns over labour market also manifesting.
Yeah, I'm going to have to hand. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
No,
if there's any
fine.
like closing thought, then go for it.
Yeah.
Maybe this one.
So yeah, there are potential drivers that can motivate people to embrace kind of going net zero, and these are here. So obviously compliance and regulation, but also things like energy cost savings, pressure from their own kind of customers, where they sit in the supply chain, the other parts of the supply chain. They're not isolated SMEs frequently. The reputation brand. So for example, you may have SMEs who want to be leaders in the climate area, which is perfectly valid, and also essentially the ability to be more competitive and find new markets or future-proof their business. So there's real concrete drivers that can move them forward.
Sorry, and now we're handing over to Andy. Is that right? I need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. How long have I got? Like 60 seconds?
5 minutes.
Okay.
4.
So we've been doing quite a bit of wrestling, trying to understand who the SMEs are. So if you've got 5.9 million, that's obviously a lot. You can see the growth numbers there over the last 20 years. What's interesting is if you take the revenue per SME and you divide it by the number of people in the organization, the turnover per person, these numbers are about 2 years old, but it would indicate that companies with 2 to 9 people are not way off the pace in terms of really large corporates. So it's quite I found this quite jarring and a bit jaw-dropping, that you were looking at 130 grand-ish per staff member for companies with 2 to 9 people. I don't know if that's true, but it's a little bit gobsmacking. So we need to dig a bit further into that. But I think there's a big question mark around, do we really understand who these entities are, and particularly at the smaller end of it, are they really savvy, or is there seems to be a bit of a perception sometimes that small is not very smart, because if they were smart they'd be big. And I think there's a few kind of paradigm and sort of thoughts that are kind of almost built into our psyche about small to medium enterprises. There's some, that slide's slightly different to the one I was expecting. There's a lot of savvy in them. So what we've decided to do as an approach is to basically go out with a fairly large survey. We've done a very small piece of what we call qualitative research. So we've interviewed 12 SMEs from around the country of different sizes, different industries, not to be able to get any representative feedback, but rather just to understand what's the diversity of view. And things that came out of that were that they were smart, they were savvy, they were leaders. They didn't just take something as read because somebody said it, and they kind of challenged the status quo, which, when you think about it, makes sense if they run a small business. And so there's a very much a kind of we need to pause a little bit and properly understand them. So the large survey has gone out and asked a series of questions. It went out a couple of days ago. With Christmas, we just don't know the response rate and how rapidly that's going to go. We're doing as much as we can to be able to accelerate it, promoting it in social media and so on. We're hoping we'll start getting some decent data in the next few days. It literally takes 5 minutes to fill in. If you flick on a couple of slides, I think we've actually got Yeah, there we go. That's what the survey looks like. It literally is about 5 minutes, for those that are quite quick, and it's very straightforward. We tested it a number of times before we put it live. Once that comes back to us, what that will do is give us a fairly wide range understanding of what SMEs look like across the country, and we will then prioritize who to deep dive into and go and do fairly in-depth interviews with. What's come out of the 12 already, although this is obviously very small, really is that the supply chain is massively important. If you think about it, every single SME has a bank account. Every single SME has insurance, or at least if they're legal, they do, because you can't operate it without it. And so there's a question around how does one get the financial services industry, how does one get landlords, property owners, etc., to be able to empower and enable SMEs to be able to consider the carbon emissions? A very surprising finding that came out of it was that a lot of the very smaller SMEs already know this is important and have already taken steps and spent their own money to do things which would cause greater carbon emissions. The most striking example we found was somebody who spent in excess of £100,000 buying effectively electric equipment instead of diesel-powered equipment because they knew it was better for the environment. We were gobsmacked, and this was a small company. And so there's an assumption, I think, that SMEs are behind the 8 ball. They're kind of, it's almost like we think of them maybe as a bit hick, you know, they're kind of from out there somewhere and they don't really know that we've got electricity. But actually they do know, and they're actually quite savvy, and they don't have any bureaucracy to go through in order to be compliant. And something Katrina mentioned a little bit before was we're realizing there's a real overlap between, as it were, consumer messaging and business messaging, because if you've got small businesses, they also obviously are people. And so if they're aware and have had hassle from who, you know, carbon this, carbon that, they already know this matters. And one of the things that we've just literally been realizing in the last 24 hours is we really need to understand the degree to which they leave their personal values and thoughts at home when they walk into the office, or whether they bring those personal values and thoughts into work and actually apply that to them. And I suspect we're going to find that there's a bit of a compartmentalization that's going on. Yeah, so that would probably be the summary. You can read the slides, you can see the data there. It's exciting. They are more interested in it than we had realized, and our suspicions that supply chains are going to play a big role in this. I think that'd be the takeout.
We will share this slide deck and the video afterwards, and promise that the next session, which is in mid-January, is going to be very user research heavy, because at that point we'll have done quite a lot of analysis on the survey and have some facts to pull out from that. And also we hope to have gotten through a chunk of the interviews within prioritized groups, whether they be sectors or maybe people with complex supply chains, who knows. Would anybody, so because I'm in presenter mode, I don't have access to the chat. Katrina, were you, are there any questions that would like to be asked really quickly? And I understand some people might need to jump off.
Yeah, I think there were a couple of questions. First of all, I think in case anyone's about to go, Emma Pearce was asking about when the survey might close. So if we can
That's
give
a good question. So because we want as broad a sample as possible, we are not necessarily keen to close it before, I want to even say, the end of the project, if we want to capture a very, very wide range. I don't know, we haven't come to a fixed date, except that we want to leave it open as long as possible to get a very broad survey. However, we need data ASAP so that we can make a prioritization decision. So, I mean, there'll be other factors in prioritizing, including your expertise, but yeah, but
it
like
is
by the
literally
end,
a 5-minute survey. So yeah, that may be, in case anyone was thinking it's going to take them a lot of time. You know, as Andy said, if you're good, you might even be able to do it in 4 minutes. So there is that. So that would be our kind of thing. The other thing, I'm aware of time. Nick Blythe was asking on the stats, please, about SME. 61% of employment total, is that total private sector or whole economy? So just probably useful to just clarify.
Lauren, do you want to say that? If you're on mute. I think you might be on mute.
What exactly is the question? Is it
whether the 61% statistic is total private sector or whole economy?
I'm not understanding the question. As in, is it that the 61% of employment in SME, that is 61% of the entire working population of the UK, or is it something else? So I'm just not quite grasping.
Yeah, it's Nick. Sorry, it was in an earlier presentation. Sorry, anyway.
Okay.
that was the question. It came up in someone's earlier presentation. I forget who, but it was just that. It's not a problem. I'm sure I can look it up. Thank you.
Yeah,
okay.
we can find it also if yeah.
While I've just got the mic, can I just quickly say something?
Sure.
I'm really pleased to join the call very quickly. Really like the approach of the way in which it's kind of formative and working through. From an AIMA perspective, we have around 16,000 members, and so there are many members in SMEs, but we have lots of people that drive these supply chain procurement requirements through, and I think that's a really important point that was made by Andy, I think recently, on the supply chain side. We're seeing quite a lot of interest in how that works between the larger and the smaller companies.
Absolutely. And I think one of the comments, reading your question, it says you agree that they're vital in it. I think our question, so one of the things that came out in the data was that they already know about it. They already understand that it's important. In terms of their attitude, it's kind of, I don't know if we're going to be here in a year's time, because we've got COVID, we've got Brexit, who knows what else is going to come. You know, we're going to get something coming from Mars. They've got that attitude, and then it's sort of, so regulations in how many years' time? And there's a degree of like, you've got to be kidding me. Is there a camera somewhere? Is this a TV show? You're not for real. In terms of the stick and 30-year compliance, they know this is important. You know, if they've got kids, they know it is, because they get hammered if they have a business. You know, Dad, why have you got something that has diesel? It's like, oh crap, you know, I'm more scared of my kids than I am of HM government, in terms of giving them a hard time. And so I think there's a question around, they're very savvy, they're very suspicious of companies that are trying to make money off carbon emissions. They don't mean, hey, we win more business because we're compliant. They don't mean that. But people who are almost like feeding off of the question, how do we become carbon compliant? And well, I've got to pay you to find that out. It's like, go away. That's got to be free. It's going to cost me money to become compliant. So I don't want to spend money on another business who's just being a leech. So they've got a real suspicion. And they also don't really believe that the large organizations, you know, listening, again, only 12 people, but they don't really believe that large ones give a toss. There's a kind of, you're right. And what we're seeing is a demonstrable behavior that these SMEs actually do care. And so there's almost a slight bitter irony there, if in fact this gets borne out in the larger scale research, that the small ones may be more genuine than the big ones. And yet the bigger ones are putting out the banner going, we care. And it's like, you're right, you do. So
Andy, I'm just going to, because there's only 2 minutes to go, I was just going to raise, for anyone that didn't see it in the chat, and for also Miranda Barker had also talked about, supply chains. I have SMEs exporting global, leading components to 75 countries, making pieces of Airbus, Bentleys, carpets for every airport in the world. I agree that supply chains are vital in both driving SMEs to move on net zero and supporting them in making progress. So thanks, Miranda. And Linda, I think we'll cross over to you because less than a minute to go. Thanks everyone for joining.
You're here. Thanks for joining. If anyone happens to be doing related research, so there might be people on call or that beam in later if they get this far, that are trying to understand SMEs better. So to the extent we can share findings, that would be great. You can get in touch with us at this email address. And our next show and tell, I want to say, is on the 14th of, I actually can't remember off the top of my head because I can't access my calendar, but it's in your calendars if you've been invited to this. So we hope to see you there and share our next sprint of user research findings. If anyone hasn't sent the survey, we'd really, really appreciate you to do so. And also any nudging on social media or in follow-up newsletters would be great. Even 100 responses would be massively impactful in helping us to plan the next round of research, and we'll keep it open so that our final report has a richer data set to draw on, as we said, until I'm guessing the end of January. So I will leave it there, and we'll send a follow-up email with the link to this and maybe some more survey nudge text Thanks very much for joining.